How to prepare for your first MUN. First of all, before we start, let me introduce myself. Hello, I'm Yonit. I have 4-year experience in MUN overall. I served as a chair in beginner committees 3 times already. For the last 2 years, I taught MUN for mostly beginners through Ambassador HQ, and also I taught beginners in my old school's society. And outside of MUN, I'm a musician. What we will talk about today are the 2 main things you need to know in order to prepare for your first MUN: research and opening statements. And I'll give you tips and tricks I've learned over the years. Now, a general disclaimer. These are 2 huge topics with much information to talk about in much more detail. If you want to learn more, I highly recommend you going to the website called WiseMe with 2E. Also, some of the things in this slideshow are based upon things there. They have great articles for both beginners, intermediate, and advanced delegates, and I used it in the past. This is why I recommend it to you. Let's start with research. Research is the tool upon which we base our entire understanding of our committee and position. But it is so easy to get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information that exists out there. So where do we start? First, we need to learn the basics about your country, your assigned country. Because most of the time we receive countries that are not the place we live in. And we need to learn how to represent those countries. To do that, we must look first into these 5 basic criteria. 1, our country size. It doesn't have to be the specific square kilometers or anything of this sort. Just need to know, relatively to other countries, is it A, very big, like Russia, big, like Germany, medium, like Peru, small, like Uruguay, or very small, like Lebanon? 2, population. Just the rank, or the hashtag that's written there. So in terms of population, for example, China would be first, India would be second, etc., etc. You don't need to know the specifics. Neighbor relations. We'll talk about it more in depth in the next upcoming slides, but generally, again, you don't need to know the specifics. You need to know, are the neighbor relations peaceful, tense peaceful, or not peaceful? 4, GDP rank. We'll talk about it more in the upcoming slides, but again, you only need to know the rank, what's written beside the hashtag. And 5, political structure. Is it a true democracy, a democracy, or straightforward, not a democracy? And if it is a democracy, is it a left-wing democracy, a right-wing democracy, or something else? Now, let's look more in detail about neighbor relations. And let's take Israel as an example. We can see that with Egypt and Jordan, there is a sort of a tense peace, right? I mean, there's a peace agreement with both of these countries, but with Syria and Lebanon, there is no peace treaty whatsoever. Therefore, the relations are not peaceful. But if we were to take Germany, for example, then everything would be peaceful, right? There is currently peace in Europe. Now, again, we're talking about what happens in 2020. If you take a committee, a historical committee, it might be different for that year. GDP rank. Basically, how much money a country made in a certain year, how rich it is. It is super important because money makes the world go round. Now, the official definition of GDP is a monetary measure of goods and services produced in a country, often annually. Nominal GDP estimates are used to determine the economic performance of a whole country to make international comparisons. The international comparison is important. And in order to compare this, we need to see not only ourselves, but who are above us, or below us. How to find your GDP rank. Search in Ecosia or any other search engine. Personally, I prefer Ecosia. GDP rank, nominal. There are a lot of different types of GDP. You need to have the nominal. Probably your first result or one of the first results would be list of countries by GDP nominal, Wikipedia. They have the latest GDP estimates and use that. Now, in this slide, you can see parts of the link. You can see the top with the United States and China, and you can see different countries that are more at the bottom of the list, like Niger or Haiti. In terms of GDP, you need to remember that GDP rank in relation to population rank means how prosperous your country is within a global scale. What does that mean? Let's take the United States and China as an example. The United States has the world's largest GDP rank. They're the first on the list. But China is second. China has a population of 1 billion people, but the United States has a population of only around 300 million. That means the average American made more money, 3 times more money, than a Chinese average person. It means that on average, the American citizen is more prosperous and more rich than the Chinese one. And this we can do in comparison to all countries of the world. Lastly, political structure. The nations of the world generally divided into democracies, true democracies, and not democracies. Quick way to find out is using the internet, searching the internet. According to this checklist, 1, does your country have any elections? If they don't, not a democracy. Now, the second and third questions might give you the answer, but they might not give you the answer depending on your country, and further research is required depending on the answer. Because the questions are, how long has your leader been in power? If they won over 3 elections straight, it's probably a democracy. And the third question is, has your ruling party been in power for more than 10 years? Again, could be a democracy or a democracy. Further research is required. And I'll give you an example. Germany currently has Angela Merkel in power for more than 10 years, and she won more than 3 elections in a row. Doesn't mean Germany is a democracy. In fact, probably we'll all agree that Germany is a democracy. So further research is required. Pro tip, searching your country shouldn't take long. Usually in the Wikipedia article regarding this country, everything will be listed, and if not, Google is your best friend. Let's move on to the second part of the research, which is reading the study guide. The study guide is a paper written by the chairs. They spend countless hours writing it with the aim to help you, the delegates, with your research. The study guide gives you crucial information regarding the committee in general, the history of the topics, where states disagree currently, the key players, more advanced reading materials, and most importantly, questions to guide you during your research. So pro tip, mark the sentence whenever your assigned country is mentioned. But from that, we can understand that the study guide is such an important tool. From the study guide, we go to search on the web. The point of this search is to find your country's history. The history builds the present and shapes countries' decision-making. Let's take Russia as an example. Russia was once the leader of the USSR, one of the 2 major superpowers at the time, but after its collapse in 1991, Russia didn't really get the same power that it had before. So Putin decided that he wants to have the same power. Thus, he started interfering with the affairs of other countries in the Middle East, most notably Syria. This we find through our research. What sources are good and what history is even relevant? Let's talk about that more specifically. How to know your source is good? Well, I have a list of 7 things that you need to know. First, go to sources you already know and trust, things like the BBC or the Times, etc., etc. 2, reliable author. What are their credentials? Are they an expert in the field? 3, check the date. That also answers the question regarding history. The best information is the latest information. Have a major focus on the last year, notably what happened yesterday. 4, URLs. Check how your website ends. An ending of .gov means it's a governmental organization. Thus, it'll give you the best statistics regarding your country and your official stances. But of course, there are also other good websites out there. So it's not necessarily, but of course, if it's a government, it's the best source you can get. 5, if you have an article, check how sources are written. A good article will list their sources in the appropriate manner. If they don't have their sources, it's kind of shady. 6, grammar and logic. A good source will proofread their article, make sure there are no grammatical mistakes and no logical mistakes. Also, there is a bit of beauty that's involved. If the website is well constructed, it's usually a more reliable source, but again, not something necessarily true. And 7, most importantly, compare and contrast. Don't ever use only one source as your guiding tool. Now for our research tips. First, don't over-research, please. We've all been there, but it's so important to know not to do that. Once you find your answer, stop. You have your answer. Don't continue. You'll just go into a loophole and your whole life will be sucked by research. Onwards. If you can't find a clear policy, which might happen, use the political structure, what we talked about earlier on, and current political affairs as a guiding tool. Because sometimes we honestly cannot find something, and it sucks, but that's the reality. Now, look out for past actions and policy recommendations if you have the time and they were not written in the study guide. Usually, the study guide will list those, but if not, look for them. It might come in a UN website, maybe an article by a very good professional magazine, etc., etc. Generally, look up your possible allies and opponents. If you have more time and will, have a deeper dive into them. It will give you a head start when coming to the committee. And lastly, embrace hard data. Numbers are way more convincing than opinions. And we will talk about hard data once we start talking about the opening statements. Let's do just that. Now, the opening speech is the most important speech of them all. It allows you to introduce yourself to the committee and lets you plant the seeds for the resolution. Personally, the way I like to write a policy statement or an opening speech is using the method called CIA method, which I also learned through WiseMe. The CIA method stands for clash, C, I, information, and call for A, action. Clash. A clash is a confrontation of opinions. That means the idea or ideas delegates disagree upon. An example. The delegate of the UK says, London is the best city in the world. and the delegate of the United States says, New York City is the best city in the world. Of course, we can only have one best city in the world, so there is a clash. But if the delegate of the UK says that London is the best city in the world, but the delegate of the United States wants pizza, is there a clash? Right, they don't disagree about anything. Something that's super important to notice is to be on clash. On clash statements means that only some of the delegates in the room will agree with you. And if you're off clash, it means all delegates will agree. In order to check what type of statements you're asking, ask yourself, would there be someone who disagrees with me? If the answer is yes, you're on clash. Let's check these following statements in order to know if they are on clash or off clash. If I'm saying that Bibi Netanyahu is the best prime minister Israel has ever had, that's very on clash, because some people will say, no, he was a terrible prime minister and that's why. But some people will say, yeah, he was the most amazing prime minister. Some agree, some don't. However, if I'm saying that cancer is a terrible disease, no one will disagree with me. Everyone agrees that diseases are terrible. Everyone will agree that if people are buried by an earthquake, they are in great danger. But not everyone agrees that marijuana should be legalized. Marijuana should be legalized is an on-clash statement, whereas cancer is a terrible disease is an off-clash statement. Also, make sure that you're stating opinions, not facts. Because if you're saying that your clash is, for example, World War II began in 1939, that's a fact. It's not a matter of clash, not on clash or off clash. Moving on to information. Information are relevant, hard facts. Hard facts are numbers, dates, names, etc., etc. History. Numbers, names, and dates show that what we're saying is not something we just came up with. They are harder to argue with, and I'll prove you just that. Let's compare. Text 1 says, guns kill many people, especially minors. They are a preferred method for suicides. Black men are killed disproportionately more by guns. But text 2 says, on an average day, 96 Americans are killed with guns. 62% of deaths caused by firearms are suicides. 7 minors are killed with guns on an average day. Black men are 14 times more likely to be killed by guns. These are all, by the way, true statistics. So we can see that the second text that had the specific numbers in it is way more convincing because it has those numbers. Pro tip, information doesn't exist in a vacuum. All the information you put in your speech should have a purpose, either to make your point stand out more, to prove why your call to action, which we'll talk about right now, is the best one, etc., etc. Think of a reason for it to be there. Lastly, call to action. A call to action is your summarized proposal. The advantage of having it in your first speech is that you already know what you want to achieve, and most importantly, others will be exposed to your idea early on, meaning there is more time for the idea to be processed by the room. Pro tip, your call to action should be SMART, smart, meaning sustainable, something you can actually do and that will last you a long time. Measurable, something you can actually count. Attainable, again, something you can actually do in real life. Relevant, something that's relevant to the solution. So if for example your committee speaks about the Venezuelan crisis, sending a man to space wouldn't be a relevant solution. And it should have a time component, something like in the next 2 years, we're going to blah, blah, blah. In the next upcoming month, in the next decade, the next millennia, or something of this sort. Time component is important. So, to summarize my entire TED Talk, what did we talk about? I explained the basic methods of research and how to make an effective opening statement that will serve your goal. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to send them to the IOMUN email or to my Instagram account, which is currently on your stage. I was so happy to be able to talk to you today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I hope to see you in the next upcoming IOMUNs. Thank you so much.